Well, welcome to my studio. This is Jumpstart 13, where we explore this idea of gradation painting. And the next Jumpstart will actually do a half-sheet watercolor painting, but that doesn't mean we're not going to paint today. So we're going to actually create 4 small gradation paintings in today's demonstration, and you'll see both the direct and indirect methods of applying gradation to a watercolor. But wait a minute. What is a gradation? Well, let's take a look at an example of a gradation. First, here's a gradation, and you can see that it's a transition from dark to light, or actually from one color value to another color value, starting at the top where it's the darkest blue and then going down to plain white paper at the bottom. That is a gradation. So easy to do in watercolor. Now here's an example of a double gradation. So this was applied in 2 steps. We first applied the brown wash, going dark at the bottom and getting light at the top, and then I let it dry, and then I painted the blue wash over that from top to bottom, dark to light. Now by letting it dry, that's called an indirect gradation, because I let it dry between steps. You don't have to do that, by the way. Now, this is an underpainting. So when I say a gradation painting, okay, that's really a quick way of saying a graduated wash underpainting applied as a first step in a watercolor painting, or any medium actually. I mean, underpaintings and gradation underpaintings are common in oil and in acrylic, different medium. And it's a great way to establish a mood. And so you take the gradation example that I just gave you, and you put a little design on it, making sure it's pretty dark, and you have a painting. And this is a gradation painting. Again, all it means is I applied gradations as an underpainting. So I also mentioned the word indirect. Now this is a word you don't have to remember, but I use it to simply indicate that we have washes applied over dry washes, and it's a bit time consuming, but it was the first method explored by watercolor painters. And I've got some examples of these painters that I'm going to share with you. So first we have the British painters of the 19th century. Thomas Sells Cotman, early 19th century, very well-known British painter. And you can see he has established a tonality with his bridge painting. Another watercolor painter of the 19th century is Thomas Girton, a sample of his work. And finally, someone that you're probably familiar with, and that is Joseph Mallard Turner, JMW Turner. And he was an acquaintance with Girton. They worked, maybe even a neighbor. They worked and influenced each other. But Turner really is probably most famous for his development in this idea of a gradation underpainting. So you can see in this particular picture that basically he's got a bluish cast over everything. It's a graded wash. It's not dark everywhere. It's dark at the top and gets lighter in the middle. And then there's some dark little elements down at the bottom that just makes the whole thing glow. So, indirect method implies a direct method. Now, the direct method of doing this gradation simply means doing the same thing, but doing it wet into wet. Don't stop and let it dry. Just pull your way through. I like that. It's more immediate, and basically you get the same results. So the innovators for this technique were really mid-20th century American artists, particularly of the California School of Watercolor Painting. Let me share with you some of those artists. First we have Rex Brandt. Rex Brandt, probably the most influential of that group, because he had an ongoing school, and he taught multiple generations of watercolor painters the techniques. And he was very erudite, artist, and so he'd put things into words and historically give us clues about the history of watercolor too. Now the next artist is someone often mentioned, and that is Millard Sheets. I wanted to share with you Millard Sheets. He painted primarily, both of these artists, in fact, all three artists I'm going to share, painted large. They painted full sheet paintings, 22.5 by 30 inch and larger. So Millard Sheets is from Pomona, California, again, mid-20th century. And finally, we have Milford Zorns, another Pomona artist, but really he moved around quite a bit. I think he's born in Texas. He worked in Utah. I knew him in Utah, in his workshops there, and then went to Pomona, and then I think he ended up in Washington State when he was in his 90s. And I think he lived to over 100 years old. Good for him. I was probably most influenced by him. So you'll see, when I took classes from him, I wanted to paint like him. It's just so outstanding to see him paint and create one of these paintings in 2.5 hours. And I just loved him. And of course, I worked for 50, 60 years trying to paint like Milford Zorns, and I never could. I paint like myself, which incorporates parts of Milford Zorns in there, parts of Rex Brandt, parts of Robert A. Wood, etc. So here we go. I've given you a rundown on gradation painting, and now I want to actually demonstrate doing a series of small gradation paintings. And I invite you to join me. Okay, I'm going to start off with a double gradation. I'm going to use a 1/2-inch brush on dry piece of paper. I'm working vertically, and it's really tricky doing gradations on dry paper without drips. So I would recommend that you work at a 15-degree angle to start with. And then I'll show you a workaround if you like working on vertical paper. So this gradation is going to be basically kind of a brownish glow, dark at the bottom, going lighter and lighter and lighter, overlaid by a blue sky glow, an ultramarine blue glow, dark at the top, getting lighter as we go down at the bottom. Now, when you do a gradation, you always work dark to light, top to bottom. So when I do my burnt sienna, which is my first wash, it's going to be dark down there. We need to flip the paper over. Okay. And do my burnt sienna, dark to light, this way. Now basically you apply the paint and then add some water to the pool of paint and then overlap, pick up the bead, overlap. 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 Now I'm double stroking here because I'm working fairly dry with my brush because I don't want to drip. Adding water between each group of strokes. And we finish up with just basically pure water. Now I'm going to blow dry this. And we repeat the process, this time with, I'm going to use ultramarine blue. We add water. It's a very quick process in watercolor. Other media, such as oil paint, you can get the same kind of effect and a much more regular effect, but it takes a lot longer too. This is very easy to do in watercolor. And we'll dry this also. So here we have a double gradation. The last color that we painted, the ultramarine blue, is the dominant color. And this could be a sky, sort of an industrial sky. And we'll turn this into a painting in the second half of this demonstration. But I want to explore some other color combinations. And you should feel free to experiment with different colors. This time, I'm going to use a yellow, instead of a brown, a yellow dominant in the bottom and a cobalt blue, and we'll probably get a morning kind of glow here. This time, I'm going to pre-wet the paper, and I'll work a little faster, I think. And I find that I enjoy that a little more, a little better than the working on the dry paper. It's a little faster for one thing. Okay, let's flip it over. I'm going to use a Da Vinci yellow, which is a very transparent yellow, but by all means, try to. So this is on wet paper. Adding water, overlap, add more water, overlap, add more water. Now, instead of blow drying this, since I'm working wet anyway, on the first glaze, I'm going to go ahead and do the cobalt blue wet. Right over the yellow. Overlap, overlap. I do have drips, you can see. I don't want to over scrub here because I'll scrub up the yellow underneath. And what I want is, I want the effect of both colors so that it looks like a yellow and a blue, rather than if I scrub it up, it'll look green and not as interesting. So here we go. Now we'll go ahead and we're going to do something a little different here. I'm going to use a big brush to see what effect that'll give me. It'll be faster and it'll be less regular, but it might be just interesting in its own way. Now, I have 4 colors. I'm going to be doing a raw sienna up, which is kind of a brownish yellow up. I've got a rose red going up, then I've got a phthalo blue going down, and then I've got a cerulean blue going down. So it's going to be 4 washes, 4 gradations. And because I'm working vertically, I'm going to pre-wet. This paper is a cold pressed 300-pound paper. It's working beautifully for me. I'd stay away from hot press paper. I don't have much luck with gradations on a hot press, but cold press rough papers work fine. All right, so here we go. This is my raw sienna. Oops. Water. That first wash I can get away with double stroking. All right, and now we're going to do the rose red going down right over this. Permanent rose, quinacridone. Dry the brush. I'm going to double stroke it. Go twice as fast. Dry the brush. More water. Dry the brush. Your water, finish it off. I'm going to flip it over so I'm going to make sure it's dry down here. A nice glow happening, I like it. Touch of yellow showing through, boy, I'm going to do more of that. Maybe when we do the painting, the barn painting, we'll do it. Okay, phthalo blue down. This is that dangerous color, so I've got a special palette here for it. Dangerous but gorgeous, so let's go ahead. Up. Now we got some irregularities in with this brush. And finally, we're going to do cerulean blue down, wet. One of my favorite colors. And it's a sedimenting color. So it should leave some little dots. Of pure pigment in the grooves of the paper. So you can see here how the last color you apply is the dominant color. Let's try this and see how it turned out. So very subtle down here, but it's still, we can see those underlying layers. A nice glow, make a nice painting. We'll try to make it a painting later. Now let's go ahead here with this one. We're going to go up with the yellow and then up with the cadmium red, not a rose, and then down with a different blue. We'll go down with the cobalt blue. And I'm going to use a 2-inch brush. This time, I'm going to use a cadmium yellow. Maybe even go a little stronger on this. Add water, overlap, add water, overlap, water. Pure water. Yeah. Next comes the cadmium red right over this. Cadmium scarlet. Their cadmium colors are so beautiful. They are toxic. So don't suck your brush. Keep the cats out of your palette. It's worth it. They're strong, permanent, handle well in watercolor. And they're not staining. You can scrub them out. If you don't like them, scrub it out. Okay, now we're going to flip it over and do the cobalt blue down. cobalt blue. Or cobalt blue is another color like the cadmium. Slightly toxic. Nothing too dangerous. But beautiful. Sky blue. Non-staining. Take a quick look at this. Okay, here we have 3 painting underpainting, shall we say, for four different little paintings, and they're all slightly irregular gradations. In other words, the blue here is a little darker, but they're just beautiful smooth transitions all the way down. Even on the 1-inch brush on dry paper, there are variations. It's not stroke free, but in a delightful way. The imperfection that adds extra variety to the watercolor application. So I'm going to take a break. Let's turn each one of these gradations from before break into a little painting. And to do that, I've sketched out some little designs here, miniature little landscapes that I'm going to paint very dark. And let's see what the effect is with that. Now the yellow one, I'm going to, instead of using a burnt sienna and ultramarine blue like I did here, I'm going to try a cobalt blue and maybe mix some red, maybe a little bit of Payne's gray. Not because I want it to sort of match this yellowish, bluish glow I've got, which is a little different than the ultramarine blue burnt sienna. Move on to the next one. This time I'm going to be using cerulean blue, I believe, and maybe some raw sienna. No, burnt sienna. Get dark. We need to get dark with these silhouettes. Otherwise, we won't get that sky glow, which I'm trying to emphasize. In fact, I might have to use some ultramarine blue. I don't want to use the phthalo blue. Be a good choice, but I don't have it on my palette right now for the next one. So let's see what we can do here. And finally, cad red. Cad red, I think, is a good one for dark if we mix it with ultramarine blue. It's nice and dark. Almost neutral, slightly purple. This little scene that I'm doing now is reminiscent of what we're going to do in the next Jumpstart, which is the Gradation barn. It's going to be a half-sheet painting. Which will be a first for the Jumpstart series. Yeah, this is definitely not just a silhouette. This is a middle value that I'm putting in here. And we'll just have to see if it works. Okay, let's take a look at these. I'm going to erase the graphite and make a few corrections on this. But basically, by adding a dark bit of painting, we've made these gradations become a sky foreground glow. Each one has a different feeling. The burnt sienna ultramarine blue has a bit of an industrial feeling, maybe a dusty feeling. Here we have a more of a morning glow, I think, a yellow and cobalt blue. I don't know, this is also morning, maybe an afternoon or an early evening glow. Certainly maybe an afternoon sunset kind of glow to this one here with the reddish foreground and the cobalt blue pretty dark. So thanks for joining me.